Did you know that the most famous explosion in Tora, Tora, wasn't supposed to happen the way it did? The massive fireball that became the movie's most iconic shot almost killed the camera crew. They didn't plan it that big. They didn't expect it that fast. But when it went off, everyone standing nearby felt the heat wash over their faces like opening an oven door too quickly. The cameraman kept filming even though his instincts screamed to run. That moment, that terrifying, beautiful blast of orange and black smoke rolling into the Hawaiian sky, became the heart of the film. It looked controlled on screen, but behind the scenes it was pure chaos wrapped in luck. Tora, Tora, Tora tells the story of Pearl Harbor from both American and Japanese perspectives, showing December 7, 1941, through the eyes of soldiers, pilots, and commanders on both sides. The film doesn't pick heroes or villains. It just shows what happened. And making this movie was almost as dangerous and complicated as the real attack itself. Let's dive in and discover 20 weird and amazing facts about Tora. Tora. Number 20. 2 countries, 2 film crews, 1 movie. Tora wasn't made by 1 studio or 1 director. It was made by 2 completely separate film crews working on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean. The American side was filmed by 20th Century Fox in California and Hawaii. The Japanese side was filmed by Toho Studios in Japan with Japanese directors, Japanese actors, and Japanese writers. They didn't work in the same building or even the same country. They barely talked to each other for months at a time. The idea was simple but incredibly difficult to pull off. Make 1 movie that showed both sides of Pearl Harbor with equal respect and accuracy. Each crew filmed their own scenes, developed their own footage, and then everything got combined in the editing room later. Imagine trying to make a puzzle when half the pieces are being cut in Los Angeles and half in Tokyo. The language barriers alone created confusion. Scripts had to be translated carefully so both sides understood what story they were telling. The tone had to match even though the filming styles were different. The American crew used big Hollywood equipment and methods. The Japanese crew used their own traditions and techniques. Somehow, miraculously, when the film came together, it looked like one seamless story. Audiences couldn't tell where one crew stopped and another started. The movie became a bridge between 2 nations that had once been enemies. It took trust, patience, and a shared goal to create something bigger than either side could make alone. 2 countries working together to tell the truth about one terrible day. What seemed impossible on paper became filmmaking history. Number 19. The director who walked away. Akira Kurosawa, one of the greatest filmmakers in history, was supposed to direct the Japanese half of Tora. He was legendary. He made 7 Samurai and Rashomon. His name alone brought prestige to any project. The producers were thrilled to have him. But Kurosawa had a vision that didn't match what the studio wanted. He began filming, but something felt wrong from the start. He wanted more artistic control, more time, more creative freedom to tell the story his way. The producers wanted historical accuracy and a film that would appeal to American audiences. They clashed. Scripts were rewritten. Arguments broke out. Kurosawa became frustrated, exhausted, overwhelmed. After just a few weeks of filming, he left the project. Some reports say he was fired. Others say he quit. The truth probably lives somewhere in between. His departure shocked everyone. Replacing a director of his caliber mid-production seemed impossible. The Japanese side of the movie was suddenly without a leader. Two new directors stepped in to finish what Kurosawa started, Toshio Masuda and Kenji Fukasaku. They had to pick up the pieces, figure out what footage could be used, and reshoot scenes that didn't fit. They had to match Kurosawa's style while also making the film their own. It was like finishing someone else's painting without knowing what they intended. Despite the chaos, they succeeded. The Japanese sequences turned out beautifully detailed, respectful, and emotionally powerful. But fans still wonder what the movie would have looked like if Kurosawa had stayed. What vision did he have that never made it to screen? What moments were lost when he walked away? Greatness interrupted, but the film survived. Number 18. Real planes built from scratch. The producers faced a massive problem before filming even started. There were no real Japanese Zero fighter planes left. The actual Zeros from World War II had been destroyed, scrapped for metal, or locked away in museums. But the movie needed dozens of them flying, diving, firing guns, and bombing ships. Computer effects didn't exist in 1970. Every plane had to be real and flyable. So the production team did something almost unbelievable. They built brand new Zeros from scratch. They studied old photographs, blueprints, and surviving wreckage. Engineers and airplane builders worked for months constructing replicas that looked identical to the originals from the outside. But inside, they used modern engines and parts because the old Japanese engines were impossible to find. They modified American training planes, mostly T-6 Texans, and completely rebuilt the exteriors to match Zero fighters. The wings were reshaped, the cockpits were redesigned, the paint was matched perfectly. When they finished, even military historians had trouble telling the difference from a distance. The production built dozens of these replica planes. Some could fly, some were just for ground scenes or to be blown up. Building each plane cost a fortune. The budget swelled. The studio executives worried. But the producers refused to use cheap-looking models or obvious fakes. They wanted realism. They wanted the audience to feel like they were watching 1941 come back to life. And it worked. When those Zeros roared across the Hawaiian sky during filming, it looked and sounded like the real attack. Pilots who flew in the actual war watched the movie and said it gave them chills. That level of authenticity doesn't come from special effects. It comes from building the past with your own hands. History rebuilt, one rivet at a time. Number 17. Filming on the real location. The attack on Pearl Harbor happened in Hawaii, so the filmmakers decided to film there too. Not on a soundstage, not in a studio tank. They went to the actual naval base where the bombs fell and the ships burned. They got permission from the United States Navy to film at Pearl Harbor itself. This wasn't easy. The base was still active. Real sailors worked there. Real ships docked there. Security was tight. But the Navy agreed because they wanted the story told accurately. They provided access to the harbor, the airfields, and even some of their ships. Standing on the same ground where history happened gave the actors and crew an eerie feeling. Some of the older crew members had actually lived through World War II. For them, it wasn't just a movie set, it was a memorial. The water was the same water. The sky was the same sky. The mountains in the background were the same mountains that watched the attack unfold 29 years earlier. Filming there added weight to every scene. The actors didn't have to pretend they were somewhere important. They were. Between takes, some crew members visited the Arizona Memorial, which floats above the sunken battleship where over 1,000 sailors still rest. It reminded everyone why they were making this film. This wasn't entertainment for entertainment's sake. It was a story that mattered. The Navy's cooperation also helped with technical details. Real officers advised on uniforms, procedures, and military language. If something looked wrong, they corrected it immediately. The result was a film that felt less like a movie and more like a window into the past. Filming where it happened made the difference between good and unforgettable. Number 16. The explosion that shook the island. One of the most spectacular moments in the film is a massive explosion that erupts during the attack sequence. Orange flames shoot into the sky, black smoke mushrooms outward, debris flies in every direction. It looks catastrophic, and that's because it almost was. The special effects team planned a big explosion, but they underestimated how powerful it would be. They set up fuel, charges, and pyrotechnics on a carefully built set that looked like part of the naval base. Cameras were positioned at safe distances. The crew was told to stand back. When the button was pressed, the explosion didn't just go up, it went out. The blast was far bigger than expected. The shockwave rattled equipment. The heat was so intense that camera operators felt their skin prickle even from hundreds of feet away. Some crew members later said they thought something went horribly wrong. For a few seconds, nobody knew if anyone was hurt. Luckily, no one was. But the explosion was so loud and so violent that people on the actual naval base, miles away, called security thinking there was a real emergency. The filmmakers had warned the Navy ahead of time, but even the Navy was surprised by the size of the blast. That footage became one of the movie's most iconic shots. It appears in the trailer, on posters, and in almost every documentary about the film. It symbolizes the shock and chaos of the real attack. But every time the producers watched that scene in the editing room, they felt a chill. They knew how close it came to disaster. What looked controlled and cinematic was actually a heart-stopping accident that turned into movie magic. Danger captured on film forever. Number 15. Filming underwater took incredible courage. Several scenes in the film show planes crashing into the water, ships sinking, and sailors struggling in the harbor. These weren't done with miniatures or rear projection. They were filmed with real stunt performers underwater. Diving into murky harbor water, surrounded by sinking props, fake debris, and explosive charges, took tremendous bravery. Stunt divers had to hold their breath, perform actions on cue, and make it look panicked and desperate while staying calm enough not to drown. The water wasn't clear. Visibility was terrible. They couldn't always see the cameras or their fellow divers. Communication underwater is nearly impossible, so everything had to be carefully timed before they went under. Some scenes required divers to stay submerged for over a minute while cameras rolled. Safety divers stood by with extra oxygen, but even so, the risks were real. One wrong move, one tangled cable, one moment of panic, and someone could get hurt. The production hired some of the best underwater stunt teams in the world, but even they said these were some of the hardest sequences they'd ever done. The water was cold. The schedule was tight. They had to do take after take to get it right. In between dives, they surfaced exhausted, gasping, shivering, but when the director called for another take, they went back down. The finished film shows sailors desperately swimming away from explosions, oil spreading on the water's surface, bodies floating lifelessly. It looks heartbreaking and real because it was real people in real water doing real stunts. No computer could create that kind of raw authenticity, just human courage and skill under pressure. Number 14, a script written by historians. Most war movies take liberties with history. They add romance, change timelines, invent characters for drama. Tora, Tora, Tora did the opposite. The producers hired actual military historians and veterans to help write the script. They interviewed survivors from both sides, read declassified documents, studied Japanese and American military records, and cross-checked every detail. The goal was to make the most accurate Pearl Harbor film ever made. If a plane took off at 8:03 in the morning on December 7th, the script said 8:03. If a specific officer said specific words over the radio, those words appeared in the dialogue. This level of detail made writing the script incredibly difficult. Drama usually comes from bending the truth, but this film found drama in the truth itself. The mistakes, the missed warnings, the confusion, the chaos, it was all there in the real story. No need to invent anything. Historians reviewed every draft. If something was wrong, they corrected it. If something couldn't be verified, it was cut. Some studio executives worried the film would be boring without Hollywood flair, but the writers trusted that the real story was compelling enough, and they were right. Audiences were riveted by the tension of watching leaders miss warning signs, by the fear of pilots heading into battle, by the helplessness of sailors caught off guard. The script didn't glorify war. It didn't make anyone a hero or a villain. It just showed what happened. That honesty gave the film power that typical war movies lack. Respect for history made the story stronger, not weaker. Number 13, Japanese dialogue wasn't subtitled at first. When the film was first released in some markets, the Japanese dialogue had no subtitles. American audiences sat in theaters listening to Japanese officers plan the attack, Japanese pilots talk in their cockpits, Japanese commanders argue strategy, and they couldn't understand a single word. This wasn't a mistake. It was intentional. The filmmakers wanted American viewers to feel what it was like not to understand the enemy, to feel the confusion and fear of hearing a foreign language during war, to realize that the Japanese weren't just faceless villains, but real people with their own language, culture, and reasons. It was a bold choice. Some audiences were frustrated. They wanted to know what was being said. But others found it powerful. It forced them to watch faces, body language, tone of voice. It made them pay attention differently. Eventually, subtitles were added for most releases because too many people complained. But that original idea, letting the audience sit in discomfort and confusion, showed how serious the filmmakers were about making people think. War isn't clean. It isn't simple, and sometimes not understanding is part of the experience. The Japanese actors gave full emotional performances, knowing that many viewers wouldn't understand their words. They trusted that truth and feeling would come through anyway, and it did. Even without subtitles, you could see the weight of the decision to attack. You could see the fear in young pilots' eyes. You could feel the tension in strategy meetings. Language became secondary to humanity, a risky experiment that almost worked too well. Number 12, no musical score during the attack. Most war movies blast dramatic music during battle scenes. Orchestras swell, Drums pound, horns blare. It tells the audience how to feel. Tora, Tora, Tora did something completely different during the attack sequence. There's almost no music, just the sounds of war. Engines roaring, bombs whistling, explosions booming, men shouting, metal tearing, silence where silence belongs. The composer, Jerry Goldsmith, wrote a powerful score for other parts of the film, but during the actual attack, the filmmakers decided music would feel manipulative. They wanted the audience to experience the attack as close to reality as possible. Real war doesn't have a soundtrack. It has noise and chaos and terror. By removing music, the sound design became the star. Every sound was recorded carefully or created by expert sound engineers. The rumble of a plane engine, the crack of anti-aircraft fire, the splash of bombs hitting water, the creak of a sinking ship. These sounds built tension more effectively than any orchestra could. Audiences sat in stunned silence. The lack of music made everything feel more immediate, more real, more disturbing. Some critics called it brilliant, others found it unsettling. But no one could deny the impact. When the attack finally ends and music returns, it feels like waking from a nightmare. The contrast is jarring and intentional. The filmmakers respected the audience enough to let them feel without being told how to feel. Silence spoke louder than violins. Number 11. Actors learned to fly real planes. Some of the actors playing pilots weren't just pretending to fly, they actually learned how to pilot the replica planes. The production didn't want to rely entirely on stunt pilots for every shot. They wanted close-ups of actors in real cockpits with real controls, really flying. So several actors went through weeks of flight training. They learned takeoffs, landings, turns, and formations. It was exhausting and terrifying. Flying a plane isn't like driving a car. One mistake can be fatal. But the actors committed. They wanted their performances to be authentic. They wanted to know what it felt like to be in the air, to feel the G-forces, to hear the engine roar, to see the ground fall away. That experience changed their performances. When you watch their faces in the cockpit, you're not seeing acting, you're seeing real concentration, real adrenaline, real fear. Some actors admitted they were scared every time they went up, but that fear made their characters believable. The pilots at Pearl Harbor were young men, many barely out of training themselves. They were brave, but also human. The actors captured that mix of courage and terror because they felt it themselves. Filming aerial scenes became a team effort between trained stunt pilots and actor pilots. Some shots used stunt doubles for dangerous maneuvers. Other shots were the actors themselves. Cutting between them created seamless action that felt alive and urgent. Learning to fly gave the actors respect for the real men they portrayed. It also gave audiences a gift, performances grounded in real experience, not just imagination. Number 10. The film was a financial disappointment at first despite the massive budget, the incredible effort, and the historical importance. Tora didn't make much money when it first came out. The box office was weak. Critics were respectful, but not enthusiastic. Audiences seemed more interested in other movies that year. The studio was devastated. They'd spent millions building planes, filming in Hawaii, hiring 2 crews, paying for massive explosions. They expected a hit. Instead, they got a shrug. Why didn't it connect? Some believe it was too balanced. American audiences in 1970 wanted clear heroes and villains. This film didn't offer that. It showed mistakes on both sides. It showed humanity on both sides. That made some viewers uncomfortable. Others thought it was too long or too slow. It didn't have a love story. It didn't have big stars. It was a docudrama more than a traditional war movie. Over time, though, something changed. Teachers started showing it in classrooms. Historians praised its accuracy. Home video brought it to new audiences. People began to appreciate what the filmmakers had tried to do. Today, Tora is considered one of the best and most respectful war films ever made. Film students study it. Military academies screen it. It has a legacy far beyond its opening weekend. But in 1970, it felt like a failure. The people who made it poured their hearts into something they believed mattered, and the world didn't seem to care. That hurt. Yet they were ahead of their time. Sometimes the most important work isn't appreciated until later. Box office numbers fade, but truth endures. Number 9. Both sides used real military advisors. Accuracy wasn't just about props and locations. It was about behavior, language, procedure, and strategy. To get all of that right, the production hired military advisors from both the United States and Japan. American veterans who survived Pearl Harbor visited the set and helped recreate what they remembered. Japanese veterans who flew in the attack did the same on the other side of the ocean. These men had lived the history. They knew things no book could teach: how a sailor holds a wrench, how a pilot checks his gauges, how an officer gives a command under pressure. The advisors watched rehearsals and gave notes. If an actor saluted wrong, they corrected it. If a scene felt fake, they explained why. Sometimes their memories were painful. Talking about that day brought back trauma. But they participated anyway because they wanted the story told right. They didn't want Pearl Harbor turned into a cartoon or a propaganda piece. They wanted the truth, even the uncomfortable parts. Some advisors from opposing sides met during production. Former enemies shook hands. They shared stories. They realized they had more in common than they thought. Both had been young men following orders. Both had seen friends die. Both carried the weight of that day for decades. Those conversations influenced the film's tone. It became less about blame and more about understanding. The respect the filmmakers showed toward these veterans came through in every frame. The movie honors their sacrifice by refusing to simplify what happened. Real voices shaped a real story. Number 8. Miniatures were mixed with full-scale sets to show the destruction of battleships and airfields. The production used a combination of full-scale sets and incredibly detailed miniatures. Some explosions happened on life-sized mock-ups. Others happened on miniature ships filmed in water tanks with careful camera angles to make them look huge. The miniature work was so precise that most audiences couldn't tell the difference. Model makers spent months building tiny ships, tiny planes, and tiny buildings. Every detail mattered: rust on the hull, railings on the deck, tiny sailors painted and posed. When explosions were rigged on these miniatures, the effects team had to calculate everything perfectly. Too much explosive, and the model disintegrates into nothing. Too little, and it doesn't look real. They tested and adjusted and tested again. The water tanks had to create realistic waves. The lighting had to match outdoor Hawaiian sun. The camera speed had to be adjusted so the water and fire moved at the right scale. Slow motion made small splashes look like massive waves. It was art and science combined. Mixing miniatures with full-scale sets meant editors had to carefully match shots. A wide view might be a miniature, a close-up might be a real set. Cut between them smoothly, and the audience never notices. Do it wrong, and the illusion shatters. The Tora team did it right. Decades later, even with modern knowledge of effects, the miniature work holds up. No computers, no digital compositing, just craftsmanship, patience, and skill. Old school magic that still amazes. Number 7. The film predicted future filmmaking techniques. Though Tora used practical effects, miniatures, and real stunts, it also experimented with techniques that would become standard in later war films. The way it coordinated multiple camera angles during action scenes influenced directors for decades. The seamless blending of miniatures and full-scale action became a template. The use of natural sound over music during battle inspired filmmakers like Steven Spielberg, who used similar techniques in Saving Private Ryan. The dual perspective structure, showing both sides of a conflict with equal weight, became a model for films like Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers. Even the way aerial combat was filmed set a standard. Later movies studied Tora to learn how to shoot planes in action without relying on obvious models or cheap tricks. The film proved that audiences would accept a slower, more thoughtful war movie if it felt real. It showed that history didn't need to be dumbed down or sensationalized. It demonstrated that international collaboration could produce something greater than one nation alone. Filmmakers and historians point to Tora as a turning point in how war stories were told on screen. It moved away from propaganda and towards documentation. It valued truth over spectacle. And while it didn't make a fortune, it quietly changed the rules. Innovations often go unnoticed at first, but their influence spreads, shaping everything that comes after. A quiet revolution in how we see the past. Number 6. The attack sequence took months to film. The attack on Pearl Harbor in real life lasted less than 2 hours. The attack sequence in the film runs about 40 minutes of screen time. But filming those 40 minutes took months. Every explosion had to be rigged. Every plane flight had to be choreographed. Every camera angle had to be planned. Weather in Hawaii was unpredictable. Some days were too cloudy. Some days the wind was too strong for safe flying. Some days the light wasn't right. The crew would set up for a massive shot, wait for hours, and then have to cancel because conditions changed. Patience ran thin. Budgets swelled. Tempers flared. Coordinating hundreds of extras, dozens of planes, multiple ships. And pyrotechnic teams was like conducting a symphony where every musician spoke a different language. Timing had to be perfect. A plane diving at the wrong moment ruined a shot. An explosion going off too early wasted expensive materials and hours of setup. Radios crackled with instructions. Directors shouted through megaphones. Cameras rolled on multiple crews simultaneously to capture different angles of the same action. If one camera missed the shot, they couldn't just do it again. Some things, like blowing up a full-scale building, could only be done once. The pressure was immense, but the results were stunning. When you watch the attack sequence, you're seeing the work of hundreds of people over countless days, all compressed into 40 breathtaking minutes. Every second represents hours of planning. Every explosion represents days of preparation. The chaos on screen was organized chaos, the kind only possible with extraordinary teamwork and determination. Months of sweat for minutes of awe. Number 5. The title means Tiger, Tiger, Tiger. Tora is the Japanese word for tiger. Repeating it 3 times, Tora, 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 was the code phrase Japanese pilots radioed back to their commanders to signal that complete surprise had been achieved at Pearl Harbor. It meant the attack was going exactly as planned. The Americans were caught completely off guard. No resistance, no warning, total success from the Japanese perspective. Choosing this phrase as the movie's title was significant. It wasn't a neutral title, it wasn't an American phrase, it was the enemy's victory cry. That choice reflected the film's unusual approach. Most American war movies wouldn't dare use the enemy's language in the title. But this movie wasn't about taking sides. It was about showing what happened, using Tora, Tora, Tora. As the title reminded audiences that this was a Japanese success and an American failure. It was uncomfortable. It was honest. For Japanese audiences, the title carried pride and pain. Pride in the skill and courage of their pilots. Pain knowing what that success led to. A long, devastating war that ended in atomic bombs and surrender. For American audiences, the title was a reminder of vulnerability. It said, "We were not invincible. We made mistakes. We were caught sleeping." That humility made the film different from typical patriotic war movies. The title is now iconic. Even people who haven't seen the film recognize it. It's shorthand for surprise attack, for unpreparedness, for the moment everything changed. 3 words. 1 moment. A whole history. Number 4. The film used over 40 aircraft building and modifying planes wasn't enough. The production needed a fleet. Over 40 aircraft were used during filming, including replica Zeros, modified American planes painted to look Japanese, and actual vintage planes from the 1940s. Managing this air force was like running a small military operation. Pilots had to be hired and trained. Mechanics kept the planes in working order. Fuel, parts, and repairs cost a fortune. Insurance companies were terrified. What if a plane crashed? What if a pilot was hurt? The risks were enormous, but the producers insisted. Miniatures and models wouldn't be enough. They needed real metal in the sky. Coordinating flight patterns for dogfights and bombing runs required military-level precision. Planes flew in formation. Cameras mounted on other planes filmed them. Radio communication kept everyone on the same page. But radios failed. Winds shifted. Pilots missed cues. Some days everything went perfectly. Other days were disasters of missed timing and wasted film. The aerial footage, when it worked, was breathtaking. Watching dozens of planes swarm over Pearl Harbor felt real because it was real. No green screen. No digital planes added later. Just machines and humans working in harmony. Some of the planes used in the film are now in museums. Others were scrapped after production. A few still fly at air shows, famous for their role in cinema history. Each plane represented a piece of the past brought back to life. 40 aircraft, countless hours, one unforgettable sky. Number 3. It took 5 years to make. From the moment the idea was pitched to the day the film premiered, 5 years passed. 5 years of writing, rewriting, negotiating, building, filming, editing, and arguing. Most movies take 1 or 2 years. This one consumed half a decade. Why so long? Because nothing was simple. Coordinating 2 film crews in 2 countries took years of planning. Building replica planes took years. Getting military cooperation took years. Convincing studios to fund such an expensive, risky project took years. Akira Kurosawa's departure set the schedule back. Weather delays set it back more. budget overruns caused panic and renegotiation. Editing thousands of hours of footage into a coherent story took over a year alone. Editors had to match footage from different crews, different cameras, different film stocks. Color grading had to be consistent. Sound had to be mixed from multiple sources. Music had to be composed and recorded. Every stage took longer than expected. People working on the film felt like it would never end. Relationships were tested. Some crew members started the project single and finished it married with children. The world changed around them. The Vietnam War raged. Protests filled the streets. Movies about war became controversial. By the time Tora was released, audiences were tired of war. The film's balanced, non-political approach didn't fit the mood. It was a film out of time, made with an older sensibility in a newer, angrier world. But those 5 years weren't wasted. They resulted in a film that still stands as a landmark of historical accuracy and international cooperation. Patience created something permanent. Number 2, survivors watched and wept when the film was finally finished. The producers held special screenings for survivors of Pearl Harbor. Veterans from both sides were invited. These were men who had lived through the actual attack. Some had pulled bodies from the water, some had flown the planes, some had lost friends. Watching the film was intensely emotional. Some veterans sat in silence, faces tight. Others wept openly. A few had to leave the theater. It was too much. The filmmakers had succeeded in bringing that day back to life, and for survivors, it wasn't entertainment. It was memory. It was trauma. It was grief resurfacing after almost 30 years. But many veterans also expressed gratitude. They were grateful the story was told honestly, grateful their sacrifice was remembered, grateful the film didn't glorify war or lie about what happened. Some Japanese veterans said they appreciated being shown as human beings, not monsters. Some American veterans said the film helped them understand the Japanese perspective for the first time. A few even met their former enemies at these screenings and shook hands. Old warriors finding peace. The filmmakers knew they hadn't made a perfect movie. No movie is perfect, but they had made an honest one, and that honesty reached the people who mattered most, the ones who were there. Seeing survivors cry in the theater was painful, but it was also proof that the film had touched something real. History honored, not exploited. Number 1, it changed how we remember Pearl Harbor. Before Tora, most Pearl Harbor movies were pure propaganda. The Japanese were faceless villains. The Americans were noble heroes. The story was simple. Good versus evil. Tora shattered that narrative. It showed that the attack succeeded because of American mistakes, not just Japanese cunning. It showed Japanese pilots as nervous young men, not evil robots. It showed commanders on both sides making human errors under pressure. It refused to simplify. It refused to pick a side. It said, "This is what happened. Make of it what you will." That approach was radical in 1970, and it changed how future filmmakers approached historical events. After Tora, it became more acceptable to show complexity in war movies, to show both sides, to show mistakes and humanity instead of just heroism. The film became a teaching tool in schools and military academies. It became a reference point for historians. It proved that a movie could be both entertaining and educational without sacrificing either. decades later, when Michael Bay made Pearl Harbor in 2001, critics and historians compared it unfavorably to Tora, saying Bay chose spectacle over truth. That comparison showed how deeply this film had embedded itself in the cultural memory. It became the gold standard. The film didn't just tell the story of December 7, 1941. It changed how we tell all war stories. It reminded us that history is not simple, that enemies are human, that mistakes matter. That truth is more powerful than propaganda. One film, one choice to be honest, and the way we see the past shifted forever. Bonus fact, the planes that almost didn't fly there's one story the filmmakers rarely shared publicly, but it's one of the most remarkable. During the final week of filming aerial sequences, one of the replica Zero fighters developed engine trouble mid-flight. The pilot noticed the problem immediately, a rattling sound, a drop in power, but he was in the middle of a coordinated stunt with 5 other planes. Cameras were rolling on the ground and in the air. Aborting the shot meant wasting tens of thousands of dollars and a full day's work. The pilot made a split-second decision. He stayed in formation, completed the pass, and then peeled away to make an emergency landing at a nearby airstrip. He touched down safely, but when mechanics inspected the engine, they found a cracked cylinder that could have failed completely at any moment. If it had failed during the stunt, the plane would have gone down. The pilot could have died. The footage could have captured a real death instead of a fake one, but luck held. The pilot walked away. The shot was perfect, and nobody watching the film would ever know how close that moment came to disaster. The scene appears in the final cut. It's brief, just a few seconds of planes flying in formation against a blue sky. It looks easy, routine, almost boring compared to the explosions and chaos around it. But the people on set that day never forgot. The camera crew, the other pilots, the director, they all knew. They knew that the line between filmmaking and tragedy is thinner than audiences realize, that sometimes the most dangerous moments look the calmest. That bravery doesn't always come with explosions and music. Sometimes it's just a pilot with a failing engine choosing to finish the job. That footage represents more than a stunt. It represents trust, skill, and a little bit of grace. Old engines, new risks, one perfect shot. Tora is more than a movie about an attack. It's a movie about perspective, honesty, and the courage to tell a complicated story in a world that prefers simple ones. It's about the hundreds of people who spent 5 years building planes, learning history, filming explosions, and risking their lives to bring December 7th, 1941 back to life. It's about choosing accuracy over profit, respect over spectacle, and truth over comfort. The film didn't make a fortune. It didn't win big awards, but it did something more important. It changed how we remember. It reminded us that history is made by human beings, flawed and scared and brave all at once. It showed us that even enemies share a common humanity, and it proved that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to show it exactly as it was, without softening the edges or picking sides. Every explosion in this film was real. Every plane was real. Every detail mattered. That commitment to truth is rare. It's a gift. If you enjoyed these stories, subscribe for more. Every movie hides a truth, and we'll keep uncovering them, one story at a time.